Today on Between the Lines, a visionary blueprint for how we can draw from our rebellious American past to encourage meaningful change in our nation today, with my guest, Christopher Phillips. Welcome, I'm Barry Kibrick. Chris has been a past guest on our show with his classic endeavor, Socrates Cafe. With it, Chris toured the world setting up these cafes so that all types of people can participate in deep, inspiring conversations, which often led to life-changing experiences. Now with his book, Constitution Cafe, Chris tours America, from its prisons to its playgrounds, to discuss our Constitution with the goal of enlightening citizens to play a more active role in our country's future.
I'm a writer today because I was a reader when I was 11 years old, and it was...
You do not need to prove your state of happiness to anybody.
Most of these speeches were as much as a month in preparation.
Characters, the heroes in this book, are seekers of truth in a story that involves a lot of corruption.
You don't get a chance to really talk about what's real, and it's the perfect to do.
Chris, welcome back. It's been a while, but it's good to see you again, sir.
It has been a while. It's great to be back.
Listen, you know, when I had you here, it was all about Socrates Cafe first, and then Socrates in Love, which was a form of Socrates Cafe, just studying love. So you took that form and now did something interesting. You traveled around the country this time with what you're calling Constitution Cafe, and you're doing the very similar thing. You're having these Socratic discussions with, as I introduced you, with groups from prisoners to the playground, and you're looking at how in our modern times we view the Constitution and what changes would we make if we could and if we should. So that's sort of the setup, am I right? That's what this process is.
It is. I mean, the could and the should, it means that there's a moral component to this. So it's very much Socratic inquiry, and for the first time though, I'm actually using a specific text, and a sacred text at that, to examine Socratically where we are as a nation and whether this document, the Constitution, which is just 4,300 some odd words, is a facilitator of or an impediment to our higher democratic hopes and aspirations.
Well, it's interesting, though. Your subtitle is the sort of Jeffersonian approach to what he would do. But the interesting thing is, I don't know if everyone's aware of it. Obviously, they're aware that he wrote the Declaration of Independence, but he wasn't even in the country when the Constitution was written. And it struck him as a bit of a shock himself. He wasn't prepared quite for what the Constitution would entail.
Right. He was across the water, the first U.S. minister to France after we became an official bona fide nation. If he'd had his way, there would be an amendment or an article in the Constitution that actually said every 20 years we're going to revisit this baby and take a tally of it, starting from the preamble and working our way down, and ask ourselves, is the next generation of Americans, is this really the document that we feel invested in, or do we need to give it a makeover? Not just through amendment process, but actually changing the Constitution itself. He thought that we did our framers of the Constitution and our founding fathers a disservice if we looked at their accomplishments as somehow iconic. Jefferson's view was, if we really want to do them the greatest service possible, don't look at them as iconic, but think that you can do better.
I think that's a great idea, but they are somewhat iconic, and that is the reality. And you know something, it's interesting. There are times throughout history, so it's not just then, that iconic thoughts and paradigm shifts literally do occur amongst a certain group of people at a certain time. I'll use your own classic. You have Socrates, Plato, then Aristotle, all right around then huddling around. You have monotheism coming up as an idea and a concept. You have Freud, Einstein, like that coming in, the Enlightenment period. Things do happen at certain times with certain people, and I do think there was this convergence of time and people and moment in history that really was unique. Not that we shouldn't still examine it nor hold them up as immortals, but they were unique.
But let's look at things, though. The same types of patterns, not identically, but they're repeating themselves right now. There is deep across the board dissatisfaction with governance. People of every political stripe believe that our government is woefully dysfunctional. They're at what the Rasmussen poll calls a pre-revolutionary state. They're deeply dissatisfied, they believe they can do nothing about it, and yet they are just like on a cusp of something. And they know not what at this point. But at this moment, they're not yet ready to admit that maybe our foundational documents are actually keeping us in the way of going the next step with our democracy. And Jefferson, just as with Socrates, these iconic figures nonetheless had a faith in what they called everyday people, ordinary people, to take the sublime steps and risks necessary to bring about the kinds of change we need in order to advance the project, the experimental bent that they believed a democracy needed if it was going to move forward. If we don't take that route, then things ossify. I mean, look at the greatest of the great civilizations. They have a period of ascent, a period of stasis, and then a period of irreversible decline. Suddenly, what causes that? Great intolerance. Ordinary people are removed from the processes of change, the corridors of power, and all of a sudden things start closing up. Now, I dare say we're in that same sort of pernicious pattern that they were back then, in which a Socrates and a Jefferson came to the fore. So yes, indeed, I'm taking their old ideas and applying them in new ways, and also taking their faith in ordinary Americans to show us the way. And that's what this project is all about.
Well, you know, it's funny, too, because I looked at the different, and people, when they read this, they'll see it, and we'll hear it through our discussion. When I looked at the different groups you talked about, and as I said, from prisoners to the playground, I found just by, and by the way, it's kind of interesting, even the changes, they're slight. You can tell how good the Constitution really is, because even the changes that were suggested by some, you went into a woman's prison, and you went to a playground. You went to some intellectual lawyers, constitutional lawyers, in fact. And here's what I wanted to tell you. There is no doubt in my mind that the most significant adjustments came from the places I least expected it. In other words, the women prisoners had a better sense of justice. I know this sounds bizarre, but you can read it. Well, read it. You wrote it. I'm telling you, you can read it. You wrote it. They have a better sense of what justice meant than the constitutional lawyers. The constitutional lawyers were more removed from the average person, and the average person, whether it was the children in the playground to, as I say, the prisoners in a woman's prison, their concepts, in my personal opinion and what you wrote, were closer to the Jeffersonian ideology than any of the so-called intelligentsia that you also had participate.
And why is this so? It's because in our nation's origins, not only were our founders and our constitutional framers not far removed from so-called common people, their ideas derived from the general sentiment at the time. So, for instance, Jefferson said the Declaration, which he, composed the first draft, was just an expression of the American mind. And so the Constitution was supposed to be an even greater, more ingrained reflection of the American mindset. Now you have people intellectualizing about things, but they are truly removed from what so-called ordinary Americans think. And I have to tell you something, one of my great laments is that there aren't these types of discourses as take place in Constitution Cafe, in which we look at ordinary Americans and realize they have something extraordinary to reveal if we would only create the type of forum that would give them the chance. And so it is that their constitutional ideas are bigger, bolder, and better, I would argue, than most of the things that come down the pike from the so-called constitutional scholars.
And in fact, as you said, every politician who is holding their Constitution up as their Bible, interesting how both sides of the aisle do this, and they too are farther removed. In fact, well, there's a whole section here. Well, let's bring it up now. It's a little bit out of the order I was going, but I thought I found this shocking, and I'm a history major. So I want to really be specific that if I found this somewhat shocking, I'm guessing it's going to shock other people as well. The House of Representatives. Then this is what caught my mind. It is supposed to grow originally with the population. Then somewhere around the early 1900s, because our population was growing so fast, we decided we're going to stop at a certain number, arbitrarily 435 people in the House. Now, because, and this is what you were talking about, we feel so removed from our electorate because now we really, if you took our population, should have approximately 10,000 representatives in Congress. And I want to go one more step, and then this is what I thought was fascinating. We actually have 9,750, quote unquote, people in Congress because every congressperson has 22 secretaries. And one of the interesting conversations with someone was said, listen, if we just give them 2 secretaries as they had originally, take the 22 and multiply it by the 435, you have close to the 10,000 representatives, and then the people are at least back in touch with their representatives.
Our framers were brilliant. They created a constitutional republic that no matter how vast our republic became, it could also remain intimate. And by some boneheaded congressional act in the early 1900s, they limited the number for here on out by a simple majority act to 435. It takes no constitutional amendment at any time to change that, to rescind that act, but they have not done it. All it would take is just a simple majority vote to again allow the number of members of Congress to increase. Because a constitutional republic hinges upon the elected representatives being heedful of the will of the people. There is absolutely no way when you have one representative, elected representative for every 700,000 or so people, to be heedful of that. The truth of the matter is that if we really looked at our Constitution, we would see that our constitutional framers created a futuristic document that was organic in intent. They would be aghast at what our Congress did in the early 1900s to limit the number of representatives, and they would be aghast that nothing has been done about it ever since. American people are mad as hell and they don't know what to do about it. One of the reasons is there's what I call constitutional illiteracy. People have not read our Constitution. You've got the Speaker of the House of Representatives, John Boehner, saying his favorite part of the Constitution is that celebrates all people, all humans are created equal. It's not even in the Constitution. So he hasn't even read the document that they read at the opening of every session. We have deep constitutional illiteracy. So a big part of this project, even if it's forward-looking, is to get Americans to actually read this document and use that as the springboard for developing their big constitutional ideas. So we have a problem. We have a big disconnect, not just between American people and our elected representatives, but we haven't read our own precious Constitution and come to a greater appreciation of how it pervades every aspect of our lives. And yet you refer to that woman in prison. She's read it more deeply and has a keener and more acute appreciation of it than the Speaker of the House of Representatives. That's the state and straits that we're in. So we really do have to refamiliarize ourselves with this document, come to a greater appreciation of just what our framers gave us. And then and only then might enough American people rise up and say, we got to stop this madness. Let's go back again and start upping the number of members of Congress again, just like they'd intended for us to do.
Well, and even Jefferson said, the more we don't, the more sidelined we feel, and that's where the greatest harm is going to come. If, and again, this is not in the Constitution nor the Declaration, this is from Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, that we're a government of the people, by the people, for the people. That's another thing that people confuse. It's not in any of the documents, but yet it is a truism about the way the founders wanted it.
It is.
And the further we get away from feeling like that, the more disconnected we become, the more disenfranchised we become, and then we go back to the Declaration, the less of an opportunity for us to truly seek life, liberty, and that pursuit of happiness, especially that last one. Because if you are not confident in your, not system so much, but even in your populace, because it's true, it's the people. It's not any of these documents, and that's, Jefferson made that very clear, and you make it very clear. None of these documents matter as much as the people and their internal values of virtue.
Right. And you know, the Constitution is imbued with a set of values. It's not something that's overt, but the scaffolding they created for us was one that gave us the opportunity to create the types of fertile conditions that would allow us all to become more civically engaged over time. And Jefferson himself, he was very prescient, as you pointed out. He said that if we don't allow the people to be involved regularly, not just every couple years when they go to the voting booth, but if they were not regularly part of the process, those in elective office from the president on down, quote unquote, would become like wolves and do whatever they want, operate extra constitutionally. And that's what's happened. Just look at our engagements abroad. Congress has the constitutional right and responsibility to declare war. It has ceded that unconstitutionally to the president. And so we have all these conflicts and incursions. We've only had 5 declared wars in the history of our nation. The last one was World War II. All of these other incursions are patently unconstitutional. So I gathered with a bunch of people, and I recount that in my book. In People's Park of Berkeley, soldiers, Code Pink activists, and they all almost unanimously agreed to tweak congressional authority so that we could only go to war and we could only fund a war if Congress actually declared war. Any other time would be what's called peacetime. Peacetime is any time when we haven't actually declared war. And think about that. Think about that tiny little tweak. All of a sudden, the president would be hamstrung. He absolutely could not involve us in these incursions unless Congress first declared war, unless it was specifically stated, because their purse strings would be cut off. It would be revolutionary.
And we see this from the very beginning. Once in power, something happens. Even the great Jefferson, who was totally against a standing army, creates the Marines. Okay? And again, I'm not saying that sometimes those aren't the correct things to do. We needed to do something at that time. But you see how, and that's why this is so important, because maybe we need to do it even, like you said, with our Constitution, not so much to change it, but even more so to reinforce it. To reinforce it. And you see, though, that when you get into a particular power, what is you gave a perfect example in here. What 435 congressmen are going to vote that they have to go under the same Medicare system as we have, the same? No, because now we've created our own little oligarchy, and in fact, as you so clearly point out, now something that our founding fathers never even conceived of, they are more interested in discussing things with lobbyists than with people. And the true thing that you bring out in this book is, as the Constitution states, we must have a way to have our grievances addressed. And now we don't, because we can't even get in anymore to talk to these people.
Right. So it's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. If the will of the people continues to go unheeded as it is now, there's going to come a time when, look, you've got people from the Tea Party on one end to Occupy on the other who are greatly up in arms about just that. They absolutely have to be given entree, even more entree than the paid lobbyists, into the corridors of power. Obviously, people who are invested in these institutions don't want anything to change. But if they don't allow that, if they don't allow certain traditions to be resuscitated, then they're in even greater peril. But it's a contradiction, but they don't seem to realize if they don't have a little give within their institutions, the institutions are going to crumble anyway. They're going to either go out kicking and screaming, or the thing is just going to go, the curtain is going to be rung down on them in the first place. I gathered with Tea Party folks and very, very liberal progressive people as well to revisit the section of the First Amendment that talks about the right to petition government for redress of grievance. And they unanimously agreed. It's one of the very few dialogues I held about the Constitution where there was unanimous agreement between the most unlikely of bedfellows that said it's not enough to have the ability to petition government for redress, but that the government has to address those grievances as well. And that harks back to our framers, and even before that, to the days of the Magna Carta. They wanted those people in the lowest positions to be able to position those in the higher reaches. They wanted that conduit of communication. Why? Because if not, there was going to be revolt. One of Jefferson's main complaints in the Declaration was the king no longer heeded grievances for redress. Now, it's impossible for the people to go through, as lobbyists on K Street do, to present their petitions. So they said, they created this tweak in the First Amendment that says we have the right to petition Congress to redress of grievance. That right shall not be abridged, nor shall the right to have those petitions addressed. And that, again, makes all the difference.
Chris, we spoke earlier, and you said that if I gave out your website, you would respond, because this type of a show is going to have, and especially once people read this, they're going to have a lot of things to discuss. I'm going to give it out right now. www, it's too easy, it's your name, ChristopherPhillips.com. And I'll hold it up there for a second. But here's the thing. Education, even back then, they knew was the great equalizer. And that's what this is all about. That's what taking this message is all we have to do is a little education. Like you said, it's 4,000-word document. What is it? The health care bill alone was a
tome.
I mean, I think it was 12,000 pages, let
I should
alone
live
words.
so long to read that thing.
Am I right? 12,000. And that's another thing that Jefferson foresaw too. Laws. Laws must be succinct. They must be strictly what you do not want to see happen, and nothing else should be involved. And we've gone just the opposite. Instead of succinct, small laws that we all agree upon, we have laws that are just, they're hamstringing our entire ability to, again, I'll go back to the Declaration, pursue happiness.
Right. I mean, Jefferson was a person who believed that democracy could be messy and yet elegant. He wasn't so much a proponent of small government as he was of elegant and efficient and responsive government. Government could actually be quite large in the sense that all the people should have a conduit to participate in governance. We should all be able to be representative of everyone else. And a big part of my book is about, not just about the Constitution, but Jefferson's absolutely revolutionary ideas to create a ward republic where all the people participated in some rung of government, so they all knew what it was like to be a representative of everyone else. His ideas of giving universal public education, quality education, from people of the lowest social strata so that they would have a leg up in the world and so would be just as educated, have just as much the critical thinking acumen as people in the higher reaches of society. He wanted that from the get-go. He wanted to distribute property, a modicum of property, to every single person on American soil, because he believed that having that property made them more of an invested stakeholder. He wanted all of these things at a time when those who already had it didn't want to give anything to anybody else. Now that they were an independent power, they wanted the regular folks to sort of stay down. If we ever took that Jeffersonian ethos to heart today, everybody would be going to schools of the same quality as those of President Obama's children. It would be a no-brainer. We would insist upon it. Everyone would receive the same kind of quality health insurance that members of Congress receive. We would want that for everybody, because we know that we can never, and this harks back to the ancient Greeks, we can only elevate ourselves to the highest reaches if we also go out of our way to do those the lowest. And that's where we have lost our way. We have lost that sense that we are our brothers and sisters' keepers. And until we get that sense again, I don't think that America can ever become all it can be and really be that beacon on the hill.
I could talk with you forever, Christopher, but I'm going to end with Jefferson's words, two different sets of them. Every difference of opinion is not a difference of principle. Fix reason firmly in her seat and call to her tribunal every fact, every question. Question with boldness. Do not be frightened from this inquiry by any fear of its consequences. Thank you, Christopher, for always questioning with such boldness and sharing it with us.
Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure, and thank you all for joining us. Now, before Chris leaves, I'd like to leave you with these few more words from Constitution Cafe. If the original American character is to be revived, much less to evolve, then we must slough off the dogmatism so pervasive today and replace it with an enthusiastic openness to new points of view. I'm Barry Kibrick. Slough off that dogmatism, and you will soon see that between both sides of the aisle lays the true, enthusiastic American character. Thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
If you'd like to get in touch with us, want a DVD or transcript of our show, catch an episode online, or receive our weekly updates, go to www.klcs.org/BTL.